Oh man, rolling.
Are you going to give your introduction that you?
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I can do it.
No, no, it's my house. So thanks everybody for coming. This is, as observed.
Now, good. Now you're in the picture.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Oh, right. This is our largest turnout yet. This is very exciting to me, and I'm trying to think. It's not just that it's a really nice weather and stuff like that.
It's just a nice weather, yeah. Oh, sorry.
You're not invited next time. And just for those of you who are new and haven't been to one before, just very briefly, the whole idea behind the Chautauqua is that we're here today is this idea that as we get older, it tends to be we get more focused in our careers and hobbies, and we don't have this like sort of same pool of experience. So even as you kind of get more expert, say in your job or what you do for fun, and like more involved, like to talk about it, like you'd have to kind of give people like 5-10 minutes worth of backstory, and then they could really understand why it's cool or whatever. But you never have time to do that, right? Or we have something about our own personal backgrounds or experiences that would be cool to tell, but it's not something you can just sort of blurt out in a cocktail conversation. So it's kind of a chance for us adults to sort of share something a bit more about ourselves, because I think every one of you here has a really cool story and would love to have you talk. Some people don't believe that, but I can tell you, I know pretty much everyone here, and it's true. So we'll eventually get all of you up here. But for now, we're stuck with, we're lucky to have David Bednar, who I think I've known for a year?
At least 2 years.
2 years, okay. Do we meet playing Frisbee?
Uncle Possum.
Oh, Uncle Possum. But also Frisbee.
And Frisbee.
It's a Durham thing. Like I probably know most of the people 3 ways to Sunday, but I know David at least 2 ways. And he's an ethnobiologist.
Close.
Whatever it's called. Yeah. An ectoplasmologist. Sorry. Please take it away.
So I have to give Sam all the credit for my title, and this is going to be my best slide. So enjoy it. I was going to come up with something like separating the possible from the plausible and how entomology affects global trade. And then Sam was like, can we sex it up a little bit? And so he came up with this great title. Is that a serendipity in your imported pants? Or are you just happy to see me? And today I'll be talking about my job. So I am a risk analyst that works for the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, for our government. And I study bugs. I'm an entomologist. And I did bring something in my pocket that I will pass around. It is not a cerambycid, but it is scary looking. So I know it's getting darker, but it's still maybe more scary now.
Is it spicy?
What is it, David? Or is that just told later?
It is. I'm gonna tell you now. I'm gonna spoil it. It is a native species. It is the larvae, a caterpillar of the hickory horn devil, which eats hickory here in the U.S. And then it's a moth, so it pupates and turns into this beautiful chrysalis, and then this giant moth that is also beautiful. But it looks scary as a larvae, and
How
they're
giant
enormous.
a moth are we talking?
This big,
Wow.
like 4 or 5 inches across at least. So
But it'll wreck a hickory tree. Huh?
it would. Well, they don't kill them. So as defoliators, they just eat the leaves.
Oh!
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm shining a light on it.
She just talks about the Lord. Oh my God. Is it invasive or is it a native?
It is a native species, and like I was saying,
Is
so
it true that it crawls in your ear if you fall asleep in the forest?
yeah, that's the earwig actually.
Oh.
No,
Did you collect this yourself?
I did not. No. So I had a professor at NC State, and they rear them every year because they're actually kind of endangered in North Carolina. Because hickory,
Barbara's fine with that.
yeah, hickory trees are declining as well. So he rears them and just tries to up their populations by rearing them and releasing them into the wild.
The hickory trees?
They play other roles too. So a lot of mice and possums and skunks will eat the pupae because they pupate in the ground, and that's a huge nutrient source for a lot of other wildlife.
Do the
So-
mice not have enough nutrients?
right? Between acorns and all the other pupae that are laying around, yeah.
So I know that, like, you actually have a presentation, but we have sent this around. How big is the actual thing that?
The moth.
The moth,
see it
yeah,
on the
it's
video.
about this big, wingspan wise.
That's
Yeah,
big.
that's a huge larvae. Yeah.
That's like a bird.
If you go to the I don't know if he still brings them, but he used to bring his colony of hickory hornedevil caterpillars to the NC State Fair and had them on display there, and you could hold them. And there's Bug Fest in Raleigh every first Saturday of September, and they'll have all kinds of bugs like that that you can look at and hold and see up close and live and in person.
Probably you can talk to David after and find out when that's going to be. Yes, you can hold
Can
it.
I ask a question? Will there be roaches in this presentation? Just
Um,
summarizing like what I'm signed up for.
I don't think I have any pictures of roaches actually.
Good. Thank
I
you.
might, but I don't think they're not like prominently displayed or anything.
Is that a trigger thing?
Trigger
Okay.
warning.
Yes, trigger warning.
All right, next slide, my man. So I am an entomologist, not an ethnobiologist, not an entomologist, not an etymologist, but an entomologist. And this means that I study bugs. And we'll go, that's all it means. I mean, just an entomologist. And the reason that I study bugs is because I just think they are fascinating. And there are so many of them that I could just study one species for the rest of my life and still not know everything about it and still just be a drop in the bucket. And so I need a few participants. Sam, if you go back to that next slide. So we're going to start out with,
This one?
mammals, 5,000 species. That sounds like a lot. And
Wait, North Carolina or the whole world?
whole world, global.
Really? That's it?
That's it. Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. And so that is, if we're going to do 1,000 species per inch, that's this many.
Okay.
Okay. And then if we do,
You need volunteers to help.
I'm going to need volunteers here soon. Yeah. So birds, 10,000
You
species.
gotta go.
So that'd be this much, about twice as many. All right.
When he asks.
Who wants to be mammals and who wants to be birds?
Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna represent some mammals.
All right. Different birds. And then next up we've got fish, which are about 30,000 species. That's getting more. Let's see here. All right, who wants to be fish? Can somebody come
Tommy, be
hold fish for me?
Mom's gonna be fish.
Yeah, that looks like a lot more, right?
Yeah, it does.
But then when we go to insects and we talk about what 1.2 million looks like. I'll
Let's
just
see.
have somebody-
Sorry, but the fish have it.
Wow. Okay.
Bye.
Okay.
I think we have a winner.
That's where I put the poop.
No, he's going backwards, back on.
Yeah.
Oh, he's doubled up.
Whoa.
Doubling.
Okay, and then I need
Another take.
20 more feet. Oh, I didn't bring enough tape measures. No, I've got one more. I'm thinking we did.
You can see how he's popular as a professor.
Wow.
Oh, yes. So, a lot more.
Nice.
Look at this.
So, yeah, like
Sad.
compared to, and
Sad.
we're a mammal, right? We're like one species of 5,000, and we're so insignificant, and yet we think that we're not. But insects have been around also for millions of years. I brought my book, The Evolution of Insects, which is a fascinating book if you ever want to look at how the world may have been formed through the eyes of something much smaller than yourself, but that has been around for millions of years. And go to the next slide. My favorite, so before I get to my favorite, I'm going to ask the audience,
Oh yeah.
does anyone have a favorite insect? Does anyone like insects? I mean, you hate roaches.
That's the
You
one.
love insects. What is your favorite? Butterflies?
Luna moth.
Oh, Luna moths. Yes, I've got a Luna moth in the collection over there.
Praying mantis.
Yes, praying mantises. They're great predators.
Beetles.
Beetles. Beetles is the most species order
Are
of
slugs
insects.
No.
Slugs are not an insect. Ladybugs. They're in the beetle family. So there are over 250,000 species just of beetles. So if you love a beetle, you could study that and just be the only person that knows everything about it. And so that was one thing that kind of caught my eye when it came to insects. It's like I could study just one species and be like the expert on it, and no one else would know any different. Like, and they'd have to trust me because I'm the only person that knows about it. And so what I chose was, next slide, my kind sir, were ants. I fell in love with ants, and a lot of people ask me like, when did you start liking ants? Was it for bugs? Was it when you were a kid? And if you ask my mom, she'll say yes, he was always catching bugs. And that's kind of true. Like, I was just catching anything that would move and putting it in a container and watching it. But that ranged from, you know, lizards to frogs to fish. I mean, like, just everything I could catch. You know, I was just a naturalist as a kid. But when I became it took a long time, but as a junior in undergrad, I discovered you could become an entomologist, you could study bugs, and that there was a thing called graduate school where you could study it even longer, and that you could study like one species. And I discovered ants as a junior and was just like fascinated by everything about them. They're eusocial, so they form these nearly perfect societies that have been around for millions of years and haven't changed at all. These ants look the same that they looked over 1.2 million years ago. Their body hasn't changed, their morphotype hasn't changed, some of the chemistry that they use hasn't changed, because they found a successful thing that worked, and it has worked for millions of years. I was talking to somebody earlier about how they were the first farmers. They farm fungus, they farm aphids, they farm psyllids underground, they move them around to trees, they do husbandry, and they've been doing it for millions of years, longer than we could even have imagined farming. You know, farming for us is only like 10,000 years old. So for them, the agricultural revolution is a thing of the past. And then their way of communicating is fascinating. It ranges from everything from sound, where they'll tap in the colony to let other ants know where they are, to chemical ecology, where they're spreading chemicals that they can smell and sense what's going on, and then tactile too, so they'll like tap each other, which is, I'm sure, is like the thing that everybody's seen, where two ants come up and they meet and they just antinate each other. And they're doing more than just touching. They're sharing chemicals, sometimes they're sharing food, and it is just incredible. So clearly I fell in love with ants. I mean, they're so cool. Like, there's a whole movie series about it, right? Like Ant-Man is now on its like 3rd edition, right? Quantumania just came out this year, I think, and I'm so excited to see it. So
does it have a lot to do with entomology, Ant-Man? Or?
The first one does. They do a pretty good job, and he has to learn how to talk to the ants, which I think is hilarious. There's a lot more male ants in it than would exist in nature, but it's cool. You know, movie
Wait,
magic.
say more about that. Just for a second. Just a quick digression.
Yeah, these eusocial societies are almost entirely female, which I'm sure all of the women here would be like, yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. Because they have a queen, and then that queen produces eggs, and then all of those offspring take care of each other as sisters. And there are tons of theories as to why that is. I was talking about E.O. Wilson. He developed this theory of kin selection. So each sister is related with, because they're haplodiploid. We're diploid as humans. We have 24 chromosomes that are split into 2. But insects are haplodiploid, so theirs can split into 4, and then that allows them to be up to 75% related when they have siblings. And so they're more related.
What does that mean again?
Haplodiploid.
Yeah, what does that mean again? Say it, sorry.
So so when their chromosomes split, instead of just having 2N, they have 4N. If that,
Speaking of fractions.
I'm not a geneticist. That's as much as I pretty much remember about it.
Why are they 75% trouble?
Because of this, their chromosomes allow them to be that way.
Siblings have more overlap than in humans.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
So
we
for
would have 50%, they would have 70%.
exactly. Yes.
See?
Second.
So glad it's next year.
All right, we'll go to the next slide.
David, what is eusocial?
So eusocial is a term that maybe E.O. Wilson came up with when he was developing this theory, and it's just this idea that their society is perfect. So it's like
Their society is what?
it's the epitome of societies. It's like a utopic society.
Just because it's stable and
It's
working
stable.
for them.
Yeah, they all work together. They're completely cooperative within their colonies, and they're able
And
to.
they're mostly women.
They're mostly women. They seem to be able to make decisions without having to like go to the queen. So it's not like a tyranny or a monarchy. Like, they make decisions on the spot, and they're very efficient at them. So even just like gathering resources between point A and B, they will find the shortest and fastest and most efficient route to do that on their own as a collective. E.O. Wilson also wrote this book with Bert Holdobler called The Superorganism, and it talks about how amazing ants are in this ability to communicate and form these superorganisms. There's an ant colony. It used to span from Southern California all the way to Northern California, made of Argentine ant species, and it was this giant colony, billions of individuals large, that had basically taken over the entire West Coast. So yeah.
Is that why
Quick question. It has to do with the migration beds. I think ants are amazing creatures, but fire ants specifically, because we have a farm down in East North Carolina, and in the last decade they have essentially taken the entire farm over.
Yeah.
A lot of them, particularly like quail, who loose on the ground, leave their eggs on the ground, decimated species. How do they migrate so successfully?
So yeah, fire ants are incredible. So I used to use the term invader, and since I've learned to use the word opportunist. So they're really good at grabbing opportunities where there are open resources that nothing else is using. So fire ants tend to establish in areas where there are no other ants because they're actually terrible competitors. If there's a bunch of other native ant species there, they're not going to be able to establish. But they produce a lot of queens that can fly. So all insects can fly, which is one of the reasons they're so successful. They are able, that allows them to disperse to new areas. All of them have wings. There's a few species that may have like devolved to lose their wings, but all species of insects have wings in their adult form. So like a larvae of a caterpillar doesn't, but then it evolves to have wings as a moth so that it can disperse and mate. So almost all insects do that. They start out as a larvae that just eats, its job is just to eat and get big, and then it evolves or not evolves, but it metamorphoses into an adult so it can mate and reproduce and spread and disperse. And so that actually is a good segue into like what my job is, which I don't know if I'm ready for it yet, but let's see what the next slide is. Okay, yeah, so a little bit more, because insects just are really cool. Like, they affect everything we do, and that makes sense, right? With more than 1.2 million species that have been described, and an estimated potentially like 9 million more that could be described. They affect everything from art to science to just everything we do. And I love this story about how if it weren't for insects, we might all be speaking French right now. So I don't know if you know the story of Napoleon Bonaparte. He was getting ready to invade, I'm forgetting where he was invading, but he had
Russia.
25,000 troops, and they all came down with yellow fever, which was spread by mosquitoes, and it decimated his troops down from 25,000 down to 3,000. And so clearly he wasn't able to invade where he wanted to, and now we speak English. The bubonic plague and fleas, they affect our populations in a way that we can't even imagine. And the things that we do, they're in art, they're in our culture, and they're very influential in our societies. So we can't discount them from that aspect. And then next slide, Sam. And then we think of them as pests because we compete with them for food. They eat the same food that we do. Most of them, at least half of them, eat plants, and we also rely on plants for all of our food sources as well. So we think of them as pests. And even though, worldwide there's only about 35,000 species that are really bad pests, but because we grow crops in monocultures, because we mass produce all of this stuff, they are major pests and they're major competitors for our food sources. And do I have it on this slide? Can you go to the next slide? I'll see if it's on that one. Yeah, so half of them are phytophagous, which means that they eat plants, but then they eat a third of the crops grown. And not just a third of the crops grown, but in the tropics, they account for a third of the herbivory in the tropics. So if you think about mammals and birds and everything else that eats plants that are in the tropics, insects and ants in particular are actually defoliating more of those trees than anything else. And it's just, they're fascinating and they give me good job security. So what do I do as an entomologist? I work for world peace. So my job as a risk analyst is to look at the risk of an insect pest coming from another country to the U.S. On imported plants. And we are governed under the International Plant Protection Convention, which we are a part of with 184 other countries. And they come up with all these rules, the ISPMs, International Standards for Phytosanitary Measures. I'm sorry I'm speaking quickly, but this is kind of the boring part. And I actually had a bunch of slides that describe the whole history of how this started, which can be cool. It started with like the, oh, Rachel, help me out. What was the first agreement in New York? That there was, it was near the end of World War II, and they came up with this agreement that we're like, we don't want World War III to happen, so we are going to institute all these rules around trade so that people don't war over trade anymore, which is why a lot of wars have been fought in the past, because of resources and things, because people want to acquire resources, and that's why they tend to go to war. And so the idea behind that agreement, which I can't remember, I'm blanking on it. Again, it was boring, and there were a lot of dates and numbers, and it was not a good slide. Anyway, and that brings us to present day, where we have this whole system set up that has all these rules and regulations around how we conduct trade, so that we do it based on technical justifications, which is science, and then that prevents us from doing it for unjust reasons. And that's all very hand-wavy, and I will admit that as much as I try to believe that I'm working for world peace and to provide food for everyone and to protect U.S. agriculture from invasive species, I know that that is not always true, and I've learned much more, especially recently, about nationalism and protecting cultures and how maybe world trade isn't the best thing for
WTO?
peace. Yeah, it's under the WTO, yeah. All right. So there are several ISPMs under the IPPC that basically provide a framework for doing pest risk analysis. And that allows us to harmonize across all these 184 countries that do it, so that we all require the same level of standards and the same level of providing these technical justifications. And so these are the baseline for every trade agreement that we do with another country. And I don't have the numbers up here, but I know we do trade with over 200 countries, with over 200 points of origin coming to the U.S. And in 2020, we had something like 180,000 interceptions of insect pests on fruits, vegetables, and plants for planting coming to the U.S. So that means that there's a lot of insect pressure coming to the U.S., even though we have these regulations in place. So it's important that we keep looking at that risk, and that's what I'll talk about next. Go ahead.
What was that number? How many?
180,000 in interceptions, and that was in 2020, and the number just goes up every year.
So that means that a lot gets through.
That means a lot. The interception rate is terrible because it's people that are doing it at ports, and these people, they have good days and bad days, right? Like, they may not want to even come into work, and they're having to inspect this pile of chrysanthemums, and they're not going to do as good a job as they did the day before. So there's actually like a 85 to 95% margin of error on that number. So now when I talk about this being a science and quantitative, it's not at all, because we don't have good data.
So like 100 million invasions happen every year? Something
Potentially,
like
yeah.
Yeah.
I know that we respond to somewhere between 40 and 50 new introductions every year.
Does that mean like a new
Within our
species has arrived?
that means a new species has arrived to the U.S. and we've detected it.
Can you build a wall?
So there's a bunch that probably goes undetected as well. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. And so what is risk analysis? Risk analysis is looking at a systematic way of looking at all this information so that we can recommend how we're going to prevent that from happening. Because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I will tell you that, like, look at every bug that has made it to the U.S. You know, you have Asian longhorn beetle, gypsy moth, right now spotted lanternfly. We are spending millions of dollars to try to eradicate or get rid of these pests that have been here for many years, and it's just throwing money down the drain because it's not going to work. But if we spend that same amount of money on just trying to prevent them from getting in, it's going to go a lot further. And that's what we try to do. We try to spend that money up front so that we can prevent the introduction of these pests. And that's why we do offshore treatments, irradiation. We have a lot of mitigations that we try to do to prevent pests from coming to the U.S.
So sorry, but it sounds like almost all of these are coming from human-made transport. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd say 99%. And it's interesting, there was one recently, the box tree moth. We watched it spread through Europe, and it had spread from Japan to Europe on some plant for planting, and then devastated their box trees all throughout Europe. It even got into like the Black Forest in Germany, and just where there are native boxwoods growing that are hundreds of years old, and wiped all of them out, along with boxwood blight. So it was like a double hit for Europe. And that was like in 2014 or 15. And when I saw that, I wrote a report on this bug, and I was like, it's gonna be here in the next 5 years. It got to Canada in 2020, and now it's like knocking on the door of New York. Luckily, I mean, boxwood's not native to the US. I actually don't like the plant. It smells like cat pee to me. But it is gonna wipe out all the boxwood that we have planted everywhere as an ornamental. And so that's gonna cost money to replace that plant. It's gonna cost a lot of money. So if we could have found a way to prevent it from coming in, then maybe we could have saved ourselves a lot of money down the road. But sometimes it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's like termites in your house. It's not an issue of if, it's just when. You're gonna get termites eventually. They eat wood, and your house is made of wood. And somebody else had a question.
Hi.
Yes.
I was wondering, so as far as like we have people bringing in produce and everything like that, we also, at the airport they're like, do you like have a banana? I'm assuming like, it's hard to track. Like, I'm assuming my banana that has something ridiculous in it, I bring them in, and that's horrific. So how much does it come through containers full of produce versus
Gotta ask for us.
individuals? And I'm not to do it.
Right. So a lot of our interceptions are in passenger baggage. So when we inspect that passenger baggage and we look at that banana, then an agent is usually able to clear it, or they will find something. That's where they're actually pretty good, is in passenger baggage. But I think a lot of the stuff comes in on containers, in bulk. We've tried to start to move to this risk-based sampling method because so much stuff is coming in. So of those 180,000 interceptions, that's only such a small fraction of what is coming in, and we're probably not sampling at the right rate for the number of containers that are coming in.
Is it frustrating with your job, like to be like, oh my gosh, there's so much coming in?
I mean, yes and no. I think that it's important. Like, I love avocados from Mexico, so I'm not sad about that, and I'm happy to write that risk analysis so that we can do that. And they apply mitigations to it, and they try to make it safe. And the risk. So I guess your question is asking, what is the highest level of risk for stuff that we're importing? And the highest level of risk are plants for planting. So fruits and vegetables that you bring them in. Like, most insects aren't going to find a new host. Even if you throw that banana into your compost in the backyard, there are no banana trees for it to go to find a new host and reproduce and start a new colony. Which is why we can have thousands of introductions of these pests every year and not have new established pests every year. And so when we get those 40 notifications of a new pest introduction every year, we look at like, well, is it going to be able to establish? If it was introduced in Idaho or in Iowa and it's a pest of mangoes, we're like, we're not worried about that one. So we can make those types of decisions and be like, we don't need to worry about this, or we can monitor for it for a few months, but then we can let it go and not waste a bunch of money on it.
How about flowers?
Flowers, cut flowers. So I'm torn on cut flowers, especially because it just depends on what people have planted in their yard, and that's not data that I have access to. So like, I don't know if you're throwing it out in your compost, is it going to get on your flowers that you have and then start a new colony? Is it it's more likely that it's something we already have that was introduced many years ago on plants for planting, because we used to import plants like crazy because we just wanted everything so that we wouldn't have to import those plants. Grapes are a great example, and that actually helped us though, right? Like, we brought in grapes from France, started our own new genetic varieties that were good for the climate here, And then when grape phylloxera, which was an insect, wiped out the grapevines in France, we were able to send them our genetic varieties to save their crops. So, there, you know, I don't use the terms good and bad, but there can be benefits to it, but there's still harm to importing plants. But
It sounds like like a plant doesn't have to be too much different from a similar plant that gets decimated by a bug to be resistant to that bug.
yeah, breeding resistance in plants are amazing. Like if I were to do it over again and spend 7 years studying something, I might have studied just plants. I did my PhD on a bug that affected Christmas trees, and just learned that the genetics of plants alone allows for them to do amazing things that we could never dream of. And they've been around longer than insects, so they've been battling these things, you know, longer than we can imagine, and have the tools to do it. And you know, that would be another talk. Read the overstory, and then that'll change your worldview. So the difference, I guess, between risk analysis for pests and other types of risk analysis. So a lot of people use risk analysis, you know, business people, entrepreneurs, they can use it to look at static hazards. In the medical field, they use it a lot because you know what your risk is, because you know what your exposure and your hazard are based on dosages, and so you can calculate it. And you know, yep, that's my risk of getting this disease or whatever it is. With pests and with other, like a natural disaster, if you think about like a hurricane, the consequences are dynamic. They are changing all the time because we may not know the number of hosts that they can affect, because most of them eat more than one plant or one species of plant. So we don't know what the level of damage is going to be, and it depends on where they get introduced. Like there's just too many variables, and the ability for them to cause damage can change over time. And climate change is another thing that we have to think about when we're doing this. So that's why it's more qualitative. It's not a science. And this is, do you want me to, I should wrap it up. I have an activity, but the activity will take like 2 to 5 minutes.
We can have 2 to 5 minutes.
We can have 2 to 5
Yeah.
minutes? All right. So risk analysis in and of itself is something that all of you do every day. And so this is an exercise that I've done many times with many groups, and it's pretty fun. So what I would like to do, I think, is I'm just going to split you guys kind of down the middle. So Carolyn, if you'll be in this group, and then I didn't get to meet the guy in the black shirt, but if you go in this group, and then you guys will be 2 groups, and just discuss in your group for a couple of minutes, like, what is the risk? You have to give me what the risk of crossing the street to get in my car after this event. So I'm narrowing your scope way down, so because you only have 2 minutes. So after I give this talk tonight, I'm going to walk across the street and get into my car. What is the risk? What are the risks of that? And how can I mitigate those risks? So just kind of, I know you guys do this every day, and so it's actually really...
Do we express this in a percentage, or like, how do we express this?
It's qualitative,
Just
so
a
it doesn't have
postcard.
to be, it can be high, medium, low, it can be 0 to 10, it can be whatever you want. But just let me know what the risks and what the hazards are. So you have to identify the hazards. I'll give you a hint. I could get hit by a car, right? Like that's a hazard. It has a consequence. The consequences vary from death to broken something to nothing. And so you can think about all of those things and assign risks to them, and then tell me what the important things are, the mitigations and the communication of that risk. So
When you say assign risk, do you mean like a 1, 2, or 3? Or
Sure.
Is it
yes,
However we want to do it.
however you want to rate the risk,
Dismemberment.
You're doomed.
because the important things are these last 2 are the tricky ones, and that's communicating the risk back to me, like telling me what I need to know to be able to cross the street, right?
Right.
So letting me know which risks I should be wary of and how I'm going to mitigate those risks. So I'll just give you guys 1 minute, because
We can do 2 minutes.
2 minutes? All right, 2 minutes. And if you have questions, feel free to ask, because I'll...
Treating and drinking. Large tree.
Why the 30 to 1st of September?
Very dangerous to do.
Falling off the chain.
I think it gets riskier.
You're wearing shoes at least. He's barefoot. I mean,
More likely you're gonna
I tried to narrow your guys' scope, so it's just this street. You don't
Right,
have to think
right.
about all streets.
No, no.
And time of day.
Mitigation.
Right.
But we have to think about all risks.
Here, we're
Because
here.
a car, 75 tons.
Oh, lucky. You guys are already on to mitigation. I need to be able to get home.
I'm in violence.
I think there's a different type of risk going on right now.
I didn't mitigate risk.
Well, let me communicate it first. Risk communication.
Let's do a risk scale of each of them. So the riskiest is, what do we think is the riskiest?
Yeah, what you're going to tell me
That
so
can
that
hit,
I can make a decision.
is it getting hit by a car?
Those are the risks that you described.
You think trip hazard? Okay, so that's our most likely hazard.
Have to wait an hour.
But low consequence, do you think, for a man like David, as opposed to an elderly person?
I'm going to roll mine. This is perfect timing, actually.
Right.
Still very low.
But yes, well,
They say crossing the street is out of sense that not putting on shoes.
we will put that as the most likely hazard in our
Okay, so
very
high
simple scheme.
frequency, lower risk.
Yes.
Than,
Lower consequence.
yeah, lower consequence than,
Had that
Hit by
day?
a car.
MVA. But, and,
Telling him.
assault.
Buster can run out and.
Or just
Yeah.
using Uber.
Yeah.
Or like
Dog
an
bite.
insect could get, like stinging a biting insect.
And you
Insects
can
are
go into
at risk.
anaphylactic shock.
We're broadening our scope.
If you get stung by a bee, but you're allergic to bees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anaphylactic shock.
I'm
No
trying
one.
to turn.
All right, 30 seconds.
Okay. So we've got
How
four.
are we gonna mitigate a risk?
We've got
That's
four.
what we think.
Oh,
The risk of the
mitigate the risk,
exercises,
yeah.
like.
Well, on the roof.
Everyone's both ways.
What is communication?
Look both ways. Maybe the partner's good.
The buddy system.
Buddy system. For bugs too, because if you go in anaphylactic and someone's got a jab you, the buddy system.
Walker, are you doing
Phone, flashlight. How are we going to communicate this to our audience?
All right, 5 seconds. 4,
Yeah, who's going to
3, 2,
No, you are, because you're his
1. All right.
No, no, but I mean, but that's the last part of the.
All right, I'll pull you guys back out. Pull you guys back out. Do you guys feel like you have a consensus? I'll listen to a bunch of people. All right. All right, so I need to be able to get home tonight. That's my initiating event, and then I gave you a small scope of I just need to cross this street to get to my car so I can get home tonight safely. And so hopefully you guys identified some hazards. I heard this group, they were big on what is possible, what could possibly happen. And that's why, like, my initial talk title was separating the possible from the plausible. And that's where looking at like the probability of this thing that might happen versus the possibility of all that could happen, right? Because risk is everywhere, and there's technically no such thing as zero risk, but with a lot of things, there's risk that is negligible, that you don't have to worry about. And so those are things that you might not need to communicate to me. So I'm giving you some hints right now.
We thought that, given the number of species of insects, that was something that we identified might be a big risk. Insects.
Yeah, insects.
You might become so fascinated by it that you never
I
even
know.
make it to your car.
Bend over in the middle of the road and
I come out tomorrow morning, you're in the ground, desiccated, your face in bugs.
Yep. So yeah, there is risk everywhere, and we all deal with it every day. Like, how many of you have driven through a yellow light? Like, you made a decision about what the risk of that would be, and then you immediately were like, okay, I'm either going to stop, and you're going to mitigate all potential risk of getting sideswiped, or you're like, I'm going to speed through it. I don't see any cars coming, and you made it fine because you're here. but identification of that risk and then the managing of the risk. So what kinds of things can you think about that are going to reduce that risk? So my favorite is like wearing a seatbelt. It's like the cheapest mitigation for so much potential hazards and consequences. For and so now I'm going to ask you guys, and risk communication is actually the hardest, but I'm going to go around. Sam, what did you guys come up with? What is your recommendation to me?
Well, we identified 4 basic hazards. We happen to have a medical professional here who steered us and said slips, trips, and falls, even for someone unshod and young as yourself, is a high likelihood but potentially low risk. Getting hit by a car was lower risk but higher impact. And then also bee stings were identified. I mean, insect bites.
Insects.
Yeah.
And what was the?
But I'm shoeless too, right?
Assault.
Getting bit by something.
Mugging and loose dogs. It's sort of,
Oh,
yeah.
mugging and
So,
loose dogs.
but the great thing
They're
is,
in one
David,
category.
that
that's
we've even though we have this vast array of 5 different things that could befall you, there's one solution, which is you need to have a companion, because we think the odds go down. Now, we suggested that Rebecca, being your partner, was the best person to communicate risk, but she was very adamant that she was the worst person to tell you what to do, that you would ignore her. And so we need to find somebody
I'll
else
do the opposite.
who you trust. So we're going to have an animatronic Abraham Lincoln tell you what to do.
Because who wouldn't listen to Abraham
Honest
Lincoln?
Dave.
Yeah, I love it. And that I like how you pointed out that there are some things that are really low risk. So like getting hit by a car, but the consequence of that is really high. And as humans, what we tend to do when we see things like that is we're like, okay, that's the thing we need to focus on because it has the worst consequence. But it's like, yeah, but that's also the lowest risk thing of happening. When there's actually this other thing that's way higher risk of happening, and even though the consequence is maybe medium or low, it's like, no, that thing is probably going to happen. So we need to mitigate that even more. And so yeah, I love. Thank you. Wonderful. I think having a companion to cross the road is going to be one great mitigation that I will employ. Yeah.
Oh, right, and well lit. With your iPhone.
And well lit.
Yeah.
And sober.
And sober. I like it. I think you're
No one
stealing
said
from
sober.
this group.
No one said sober. He's
All
making
right, take
this
it
up
back.
now.
Take it back.
That's all his own view.
Does anybody on this group, you guys want to add anything?
Remarkably, we came up with exactly the same.
Because you are brilliant people. When I was listening to this group, you guys were like focused on the mitigations almost immediately, which I love too. Like you're like, who cares about what the risks are? Like these are the things that are gonna make you safe. Just do them. Yeah.
The first group completely overlooked the possibility of owl attack.
I love it. All right, so that's what we all do it every day. I just do it with insects, and that's what makes it different. And so, how did I get here? I'm just I know Sam likes to make this personal, so I'm trying to make it a little
Make it
personal.
baby.
I am from Oregon. That's where I discovered ants as a junior, going to Pacific University in Forest Grove. I had a great.
That's why you're not wearing shoes.
That's why I'm not wearing shoes. I actually should just be wearing shorts too. I didn't start wearing pants until recently. And I do love bugs so much that I have tattoos of both my PhD and my master's. So ants and Christmas trees, which I studied in North Carolina. The Fraser fir is the best Christmas tree. If you don't have a Fraser fir, then you are dead to me. But at Christmas, you should have a Fraser fir Christmas tree.
Okay.
North Carolina is the #2 producer in the country. Oregon is the #1 producer of Fraser fir Christmas trees. Believe it or not,
Coincidence?
even though they're native to North Carolina. Just again, another fascinating story. And then these are my kids, Collins and Randy. This is why I'm here in North Carolina. I have put down roots in North Carolina. They are now 10 and 7, and just
Which insect are they?
This is an Asian longhorn beetle, so it is a Cerambycidae,
Oh, it is,
full
yeah.
circle, and it's an invasive species that has wiped out all kinds of trees in the U.S. It's awful. Yeah. Any questions? That's me. That was me in 2018.
Oh.
And I wish I still had this shirt because I would have worn it. It had these great bug pictures on it. Anyway. Oh, and there's a funny story here. So USDA, our lab, used to have a mascot, which was Pestina. But she was a little too sexy, and so now it's invasive, and he's terrifying. So we didn't strike a balance there. We just went the other direction. Yeah.
Thank you, David. That was awesome. I just want to say a big thank you to David. Clearly, putting something like this together is non-trivial and also highly uncompensated. So thank you. It's you. This is the thing that makes this Chautauqua happen. It is the most questions. Yes. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a 5-minute break, so go to the bathroom, get another drink. I need to fix something about the computer before I do my talk, so...
Get Buster some cheese.
Did he tell you that? Did he
Yes.
tell you that? Oh! Yeah, pay no attention to what the dog tells you to do.
What do you need to do differently for you?
Oh, I have to, there's a video component, so I have to get the speaker tuned into my computer as opposed to...